I'm Brian Jennings, Head of Adult Services. I'm here with Nancy Moskowitz, who has collection development responsibilities for fiction and mystery. And we're going to talk about some of the books that we're most anticipating for 2022. A few of them, maybe we've already started, some things that have come out in January. And at the end, we'll open it up to everybody. But for the first part, it'll be just, you're just stuck with Nancy and I.
Okay.
Rita says she can't hear anyone. Maybe that was from a second ago. Everybody should be able to hear us now. If you still can't hear us, put it in the chat.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
I can hear you, Nancy.
Okay. We're going to start with our first book. I was really excited about doing this. I don't know why. Maybe because we don't have access to our older books. I'm so excited about what's coming around. And so we picked some, and I really could have gone on for days with this. But the first one I want to talk about is Anthem by Noah Hawley. Maybe some of you have read his other book, or his other books. One of them was Before the Fall. And in this book, he sets up a really horrible dystopic world where everything is going wrong. It's gotten awful. And now a lot of young people are killing themselves. So he brings forth a group of young people who want to see if they can make things better. And this book was actually just reviewed in the New York Times. They said it was equal parts horrific, catastrophic, and at times strangely entertaining. And they also compared it to Kurt Vonnegut, which I think makes it sound even better because there's some humor there. Okay, next. This is coming out, well, it came out on Tuesday, January 4th. And yeah. Okay, the next book also came out this past Tuesday, Honor by Thridi Amrigar. She's one of my favorite authors. If anyone read The Space Between Us, an older book, one of my favorite books of all time. In this book, it describes two women. One is an Indian-American journalist who comes to India, to this very small village, to interview a woman who was almost killed in an honor killing. It seems that she is a Hindu woman who actually married a man who was Muslim, and that's, to her family, that is dishonorable and worth killing for. So her two brothers set them on fire, killed her husband, and she was maimed very badly. So these two women get together to talk about what happened and why. And in the meantime, they find out a lot about themselves and each other's cultures. So if you do have an RCLS library card and your library belongs to, has Hoopla, it is available on an ebook. So if you're interested, go right out and get it on Hoopla as an ebook. All right.
I also added it to our Overdrive and Libby accounts.
Oh, good.
Too,
yeah. I think she's a wonderful author, and her books are very, very moving and very heartfelt. I just think she's a terrific writer. So,
we can email everybody this presentation afterwards.
Oh, yes. I will remember to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Next. Okay. If anyone remembers David Gutterson for Snow Falling on Cedars, which he wrote quite a while ago, in this book, he talks about, it's a mystery. A young Ethiopian girl is found dead. Her parents, who are white, are charged with her murder. I love mysteries, and I do like mysteries that take on larger social issues. So it's not just so the characters are very well drawn, and it also reflects the society that we have, the racism, and how people can get justice. So this sounds great. I can't wait to read this one. Next. Okay, I'm going to have a hard time saying this word. Recitatif by Toni Morrison and Zadie Smith. As it says here, this was a short story, her only short story, written by Toni Morrison in 1983. but they brought this out as a standalone, and the introduction is by Zadie Smith. It's unquestionably a work of genius, and it sounds really interesting. It talks about two women who were friends since they were 8 years old, and they kept in touch sporadically through the years. But in this instance, they meet and they have a very long, heartfelt talk. They talk about all sorts of things, race and relationships. One of them is Black and one of them is white, but the reader is not told who is what. So I think that sounds very intriguing. And anything by Toni Morrison is certainly worth reading. And it's a short book, so. Okay. Oh, The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum sounds so interesting. It's the first novel by Brendan Slocum, who is a musician and a teacher. And you could see what it's about, but this Ray McMillan has this old battered fiddle, which he's learned to become a very skilled classical musician. It's stolen from him, and it turns out this battered old fiddle is a Stradivarius. And so it's being held for ransom for $5 million. And at the same time, the family of the man who enslaved his great-great-grandfather say the violin belongs to them. So you've got these two different plot points converging, and this sounds like a really great read. So I'm looking forward to this one. This is coming out February 1st. Okay, next. Okay, Clean Air by Sarah Blake. Unfortunately, our pictures are covering. It's got a really pretty cover. Sarah Blake is probably known to a lot of you. She wrote The Postmistress, and she wrote the guest book. But this book is a little bit of a departure for her. It's one of my favorite genres, which is cli-fi, climate apocalypse. So the climate apocalypse has come and gone, and people are forced to live in these airtight domes because there are so many trees and so much pollen that the air is unbreathable. People cannot leave their domes. Then somebody starts slashing these domes, and the people inside the domes are dying from this. So this has a mystery, cli-fi, and a writer who knows how to tell a really good story. So this should be something to put on your list to be read. Sounds good. It's February 8th. Okay. Diablo Mesa by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. Most people probably know who they are, at least have read some of their books. They write separately and together. This is the third in the Nora Kelly series, but it has that UFO vibe, which makes it more interesting. So I think this will be something that a lot of people will want to read. This is coming out February 15th. Berlin Exchange by Joseph Cannon. He's one of the premier Cold War espionage thriller writers around. We've lost a lot of them over the years, but this is a standalone, and it goes back to 1963 with the Cold War at its height, KGB in East Berlin, and a border swap. So for those who like Cold War thrillers, this is definitely a good one. And he's got a great track record. Joseph Cannon's books are very reliably well-written and exciting. Okay, The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I actually just read this book. I read it in an e-galley form because I like Lucy Foley. She wrote The Hunting Party and
Guest List.
Wait, did she write?
The Guest List.
Yes, The Guest List. In this, Jess, she's out of work. She asked her half-brother, if she could stay with him. He doesn't really want her to. He said this isn't a good time, but she comes anyway, and he's expecting her, but he's not there. And the apartment is nicer than she thought it would be. So she decides to investigate the other tenants to see if they can tell her when they saw him last or if they know anything. And they're not talking. So she takes it upon herself to discover what happened to her brother. So this is a very suspenseful, good book. I would recommend it highly. I think all her books are good, and this one is right up there. That's coming out February 22nd. Okay, The Golden Couple by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. I read this one also in advance. and if you've read anything by her, and she's written quite a few, it's a domestic suspense, domestic thriller. It's a couple who seem like they have everything, and they're having some trouble in their marriage, so they seek out this therapist, Avery Chandler, who's she's really an outlier. She's been struck off these psychologist lists, and she's not accredited, but they go to see her anyway because she has a very unique way of treating people in therapy, and they have to follow everything she does, no matter how odd it seems. So that's the premise of the book, and again, it's a real page turner, and I think people who like her will like this one as well. And that's coming out on March 8th. Oh, Shadows Reel by C.J. Box. C.J. Box is one of my favorite mystery authors, and it's again about what Wyoming Game Warden Joe Pickett and his wife. It works in the library, and she finds a book with Nazis, like a scrapbook, and she doesn't know why it's in the library, put it there. At the same time, her husband, the game warden, finds something really odd. And both of their discoveries put the family at risk for a change. And really, this family has been through everything. I don't know how many houses they have burned down over their heads, and how many pets they've lost, and horses and cars. But I still think that he writes a really compelling book. And I believe Nate Romanowski also makes a guest appearance in this book, and he's a very compelling character. So I would, of course, recommend it. Oh, Booth by Karen Joy Fowler. Karen Joy Fowler is another writer. She never makes it kind of to the top of the list, but she's written some really good books. And I think that this one should be really interesting because the Booth family, who you probably mostly heard of, John Wilkes Booth, was a very interesting family. The husband, Junius Booth, he left his family in England. He left his wife, and he eloped with someone, a young woman. They came to the United States. They had 10 kids. They went on the stage. Edwin Booth was the son, who was very talented, and John Wilkes Booth, who said the problem child. He was a real difficult. He brought the family a lot of difficulties. So once he had assassinated Lincoln and brought really dishonor and shame on the family, we see what happens with the Booth after this all happened, before and after. So I'm really looking forward to this one too. Should be good. That's March 8th coming out. Oh, French Braid by Ann Tyler. I just love an Ann Tyler book. She's one of my favorite authors. They're pretty similar. They take place in Baltimore. The family that she discusses is usually very quirky, or at least some of the members are very quirky. But they're depicted with a lot of love and a lot of humor. In this family, we meet them in 1959 when they're on their summer vacation, and then she follows the family for the next 60 years. And Ann Tyler's getting up there in age, and I'm so glad that we have another book by her. The last one was Redhead by the Side of the Road, which, if you haven't read Ann Tyler, and I can't imagine you haven't, you got to read her. She's just so heartwarming, and she writes with such knowledge and such affection for her characters. She is a treat. Okay. Oh, What Happened to the Bennetts by Lisa Scottolini. This is a standalone about an FBI court reporter who was forced to go into witness protection. Her last book was Eternal, which was a real departure for her. That was a historical novel that took place during the 30s and 40s in Italy. So I think she's branching out, and this looks like more a little different for her, even though it's still got that kind of crime feeling to it. So, but I don't think it's possible for her to write a bad book. She's just such a professional. This will be out March 29th. Okay. Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart. If any of you have read Shuggie Bain, that won the Booker Prize last year. It was a first novel. This book, and I'm not sure the time period it takes place in, and I wasn't aware that being Protestant and Catholic in Glasgow was a problem, but apparently it was on this housing estate with these two young boys grow up, and first they're enemies and they become friends and then they fall in love. But obviously this is not something they can be upfront about. So besides the fact that they're in a same-sex relationship, they're different religions. So, but it's supposed to be very suspenseful, and I'm sure it's just as good as Sugar Dane. So that's coming out April 5th. Okay, also coming out April 5th is Candy House by Jennifer Egan. If you read A Visit from the Goon Squad, this has a lot of the same characters in it. Now, she is a challenging writer. She's not for everybody. She doesn't write a typical chronological novel. This book, though, sounds like at the heart, it's about authenticity in a world where memories and identities are no longer private. So I think if you're in the mood for something to challenge you, and if you like Visit from the Goon Squad, then you really have to read this one, Candy House. Okay, Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This is probably going to be in sci-fi. It includes time travel, a 500-year span with time travel, a pandemic, and a 20th century moon colony. It follows three different characters. One is a young man who's been ostracized for his bad behavior, and then he meets up with a famous writer and a detective. So it should be, quite a satisfying read. She's a great author, and she was writing some more mystery-like books, but I think she's going back to these speculative fiction type books. So this is April 5th. All right. April 26th is The Good Left Undone by Adriana Trignani. This is based on actually a true story. Adriana Trignani writes about Italy and about Italian Americans. In this book, she goes to, it's about Matilda, who is dying, and she decides to reveal stories and secrets from her life and her mother. Her mother was in love with this Scottish sea captain who fathered her during World War II, but he was never really part of their life. And but she wants to tell the story that her mother was never able to really live or tell out. So this should be a good weepy kind of book. People who like historical, romantic reads will probably enjoy this one. Okay. Chris Bajalian is probably one of the most unique writers. He never writes the same story twice. His last book was took place in the 1600s in Massachusetts, The Witching Year, I think it was called, Witching Hour. And
you muted again, Nancy.
Okay, I got it. I don't know why that happens.
We heard The Witching Hour.
Yeah, The Witching Hour. Okay. So it's about an actor and her husband. They decide to go on a group honeymoon to the Serengeti. And this sounds fascinating. They find themselves captives of Russian mercenaries. So that sounds really exciting. So I just love the way his books take place all over the world in all different time periods. So, and if you read his first book, which was Midwives, that was so good because he's writing as a woman, remembering her 14-year-old life. And I just think he's such a creative writer. He can put on any kind of a voice and it sounds authentic. So this is coming out May 10th. I'm really looking forward to this one. This one sounds very interesting. The Latecomer by Jean Half-Corlitz, who wrote The Plot, which is her last book. You can't really see the cover of this book, but there's 3 roses. And then there's a little rose that's smaller. And I think it's emblematic of the characters. There's 3 triplets who come from a wealthy family. They find out that there was a 4th embryo that was never allowed to develop. Well, somehow it was. I'm not sure of the circumstances. They're surprised that this baby, their other sibling, has just been born. So that's kind of what story. So the 3 siblings now have to contend with this baby who is they're not identical because it's two boys and a girl, but it's this triplet who's much younger than they are, but it just sounds so interesting. I don't know how authors come up with these plots. So that's coming out May 31st, 2022. Okay, a lot of people love Steve Berry. History is at the heart of all of his books. And this one sounds a little like the Da Vinci Code to me. The Ghent altarpiece has been vandalized 13 times, which I guess is true, but why? Why would people do this? So that's the secret of the book, and I think that it sounds really fascinating. We'll find out. This is coming out June 7th, and I'm looking forward to this one too. Okay, I don't know if people are familiar with Louis Bayard. He writes about historical figures. He's written about Abraham Lincoln, Edgar Allan Poe, Theodore Roosevelt. Well, in Jackie and Me, he takes on Jacqueline Bouvier before she was married. In 1951, when this book takes place, Jackie and Jack meet at a dinner, and Jack has to get married. His family is pressuring him. He has to find the right political life. So he thinks she might be a likely prospect, and they do date, but he doesn't have time to really go do any in-depth research of her. So he has his fixer and friend, Lem Billings, kind of see if she is worthy of being his wife, trying to groom her to become the politically perfect wife. She has to look a certain way. She has to overlook a lot of things. So even though it seems weird to me that Jackie Kennedy is now a historical figure, she certainly is. So there's probably a lot of truth in this book. I'm looking forward to this book, June 14th. Okay, Lauren Belfer, she's a native of Buffalo, and she wrote that book, City of Light, was her first book. Very interesting book. So this one, Ashton Hall, sounds like kind of like a gothic-y book. Hannah and her son are spending the summer at this historic Ashton Hall in England. Her son's very inquisitive. He finds a skeleton hidden in the wall. And somehow he and Hannah, I don't know how old Nikki is, but they decide to find out who she was. And in the meantime, they find out what happened, what life is like for women who live this privileged life at Ashton Hall. So this sounds really like an interesting book. If you like historicals with a touch of mystery, this sounds like it's got everything. This book's coming out June 14th. And my final book, I think it's my final, is Horse by Geraldine Brooks. Geraldine Brooks is also she hasn't written anything in a while, but she wrote Year of Wonders about the plague in England, and she's written March about the father and the Little Women. And in this case, she writes about this, it's a true story of a racehorse in 19th century in the South. The horse's groom is enslaved, and the horse is a very famous, it's a real horse. It's called Lexington. And it was not only a big champion, it became a stud sire, which I guess is, he fathered a lot of little racehorses. So it talks about the people in the book, and it also, while it's talking about that, they discuss enslavement and racism back in the 19th century up to the present day. So I'm looking forward to anything by Geraldine Brooks because she writes a great story. Okay, I think that might. Okay, now Brian's going to talk about some nonfiction. He's not going to be as long-winded as me, so go ahead.
Wow, there's a lot of new fiction coming out by some big-time authors, or maybe they were saving everything up during the pandemic, or what?
Yeah, I don't know. There's just so much that's coming out that's good. Oh, I do want to mention before we get into nonfiction about a book called The Maze by Nelson DeMille. That book was supposed to come out in June of 2021. Then they pushed it to December. Then it was pushed to June of 2022. Now it's pushed to October of 2022. I have no idea. They're playing with these dates for some reason. I mean, we certainly saw a lot of stuff that was held up during the pandemic, but for some reason, things are not coming out when they're supposed to. And I don't know what's going on with this Nelson DeMille book. We have a lot of holes on it. I haven't even seen any cover art for it. So unless maybe the book is really terrible and the publisher's making him rewrite. He's working on it with his son, but yeah, these I have to say that these due dates are pretty fluid because we're not getting stuff on time and stuff just isn't. There's a paper shortage and a supply chain shortage. So keep that in mind. These dates, I think, are more approximate than anything else.
Okay, so some of them could change, some of the dates.
Yeah, they will change, undoubtedly.
Okay, keep that in mind. Nonfiction. I just have a few nonfiction books, but all really good stuff. First one is Lost and Found, a memoir by Catherine Scholes. She's a New Yorker writer. She won a Pulitzer Prize for an article she wrote for the New Yorker, and she also wrote a great book called Being Wrong, Adventures in the Margins of Error. And kind of the jumping off point, I just read the first chapter of this book. It comes out next Tuesday, so I was able to read a sample. And the jumping off point is the loss of her father. But she's a very smart writer, so she kind of goes back and says, well, why do we use this term lost when someone dies? And she looks at the root of the word, and then she talks about her father, who's a very interesting character. And then I take it from the reviews of the book that found has to do with her meeting her partner and them getting married. And then perhaps at the end, there's some sort of overall take. But she's a very, very good writer, very smart writer. So I'm really looking forward to that. Finishing that. Usually we don't do sports books here, but big fan of Charles Oakley. I got my Knicks hat here. I put my Knicks hat on, which my father-in-law gave me when he moved to Florida. He bequeathed this to me. But I love the Knicks from the 90s with Charles Oakley, and the introduction to the book is actually written by Michael Jordan, because Oakley played with Jordan in Chicago, and then of course he was traded to the Knicks for Bill Cartwright, and then he became this kind of tough guy, rebounder. More recently, he was in the news because he was thrown out of Madison Square Garden by the owner for, it sounds like, glaring at him. But if Charles Oakley glared at me, I'd be scared too. So kind of a tough guy. If you like sports, you like basketball, you like the Knicks, you'll want to read that book, coming out February 1st. And then another book coming out that I'm really looking forward to is African Founders by David Hackett Fischer. And I find this really interesting because David Hackett Fischer has written, first of all, he's written some of the best histories that I really enjoy. And the thing about his books is he really does, and I've talked about this before in some of these presentations, he does historiography well. So he writes about the history of how different people have written about a topic. His historiography in his book on Paul Revere was just incredible. He's also won a Pulitzer Prize for his book Washington's Crossing, about George Washington crossing the Delaware. But then his earlier books, one was about the Federalists and how that was a conservative revolution. And then he wrote a book called Albion's Seed, which is a giant book about 4 British folkways in America, different groups. So I never really would think of David Hackett Fischer as woke, you know, but now all of a sudden David Hackett Fischer is writing this book about the African founders. And in some of the reviews, it said he went back to Africa to do research, which, I mean, this guy is a serious historian, but he also writes, I think, in a way that you can also digest it. So it'll be really, really interesting to see what he has to say about the African founders, because I know he's going to do his research. He's going to do the work So May 31st for his book. And then finally, this is our last book, June 28th, 2022, Patrick Radden Keefe, who, I mean, Nancy and I have talked about it. His book, Say Nothing, which was about a murder and the IRA in Northern Ireland, was incredible. He wrote a book last year, Empire of Pain, about the Sackler family, who, of course, was involved with OxyContin and the opioid crisis. So when you think about it, his books have really been about crime. But there's always kind of a moral ambiguity. There are, you know, the Sacklers, when they got started out, they wanted to provide medication to patients with mental illness. So instead of simply leaving these people in institutions with no hope or giving them electric shock treatment, they wanted to, you know, so they started out good, but then somewhere, you know, whether it's greed or something else gets in the way. So this seems to me to be a book of 12 stories which take on people who are crooks, killers, grifters, rebels in some way. So I'll be really interested to read that. I think in the reviews for this, someone said anytime he writes an article for the New Yorker, it's an event. And he is that kind of a writer, that when he publishes something, he writes nonfiction, he does his work, but he also makes it so gripping and so interesting to read. So I have to wait 6 months for this. But that is the last book. And as always, you can access Novelist, Book Browse from our database page and get more recommendations there. If you haven't been into the library lately, it's probably a good time for us to talk about also just a little bit, since we have you here, about our renovation and about what's going on. Currently, our stacks are closed for most of our older materials. So we're really only circulating new fiction, new nonfiction, new DVDs, new Blu-rays, new large print, new mystery, new graphic novels. We also have a small collection of paperbacks, which we're kind of curating to kind of put some of these favorite books of the last, either classics or our favorite books of the last few years, books that have been made into movies recently, to kind of give our smaller collection depth. But this is the collection that we're going to take with us to South Main Street, where we'll be in temporary quarters for 2022, starting late February or early March. We will be there while they renovate and expand this building. So we're going to do our best to still bring you the newest, but also some classics. We know it will be a difficult time, but we'll get through it, and we'll still be doing these webinars, and before you know it, we'll be back in our new space. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add about this, or maybe we can open it up and see if anyone else wants to share.
And one more slide about see what's new.
Oh, see what's new. Yes, I can show folks how to get to see what's new on the New City Library webpage. How do I, newcitylibrary.org, how do I see what's new? You can see the new fiction, new mysteries, new nonfiction, new romance, new teen books. We keep our lists of what has just come out here.